Right, guys, next one on cattle ranching. Apologies if I'm drinking my coffee while I'm doing this. Power through. Right, okay, so you look at the 1870s, the West is developing due to that impact of settlers spreading westwards along the. Look at our big concepts during this topic: migration, settlement, development, and the cattle industry is a big part of that. The growth had a massive impact on development because the cow towns, for example. Right, so during the Civil War, we know this that in the South the long haul cattle basically increased dramatically, got a huge numbers because they were left untended, whereas in the North there wasn't as many cattle, so beef became hugely in demand. You could get a cow for you'd sell a cow for $40 in the North, but you could only sell one for about $5 in Texas. This leads to the long drive. Okay, you need to know that early period, the long drive, basically because Texans try to cash in on this money. Right, so quick look at the cattle trails. I'll give you time to have a little read of them. Big ones really are the Chisholm Trail going up to Abilene, Goodnight and Loving going off to the mining towns and reservations. Right, first thing, let's have a look at Joseph McCoy and Abilene. We need to know these big hitters in the cattle industry. So McCoy realizes that Abilene, Kansas would make a good transit point for the drive. So 3 reasons. So quarantine laws, this was when Texan fever, this is when the Texas cattle were causing a fever to the other cattle down south. So they'd initially quarantined it. But these are relaxed, so now they could be driven through Kansas all the way up to Abilene. A trading route called the Chisholm Trail. Importantly, McCoy advertises this. He brings in stockyards to keep the cattle. He arranges a depot. He really gears this up. Look, $5,000 for marketing his new venture in Texas. High profits. Look at those numbers: 35,000 cattle driven to Abilene in '67, and then 3 million between '67 and '72. It's the first cow town. It leads to expanding rapidly. Right, Goodnight and Loving, so established in '66. Goodnight and Loving, they drove a herd of 2,000 cattle to Fort Sumner, New Mexico, where the cattle were used to basically feed the army. They're paying $12,000 for 800 cattle, 4 times their worth in Texas. While Goodnight returns to Texas for another herd, Loving moved the remaining 1,200 north and sold them to John Iliff, who kind of built a big successful business. When Loving died, Goodnight continued to drive them to the mining towns, so he was quite successful doing this. So it's just an example of how they could use trails to benefit themselves. Right, John Iliff, again another big hitter we should know. He buys the herd of cattle for $500, cheap price as the cattle are exhausted from the long drive from Texas and too thin to sell for beef. So he saw this as a problem, right? So in the same year, gold's been found in the Rockies, which meant there was a big demand in meat, but it was tricky to transport. He decided to fatten this new herd up on the plains, and then he would be able to sell the beef for a good price. He bought land in the open range near Denver, and in 1870, his herd was up to 26,000, covering 16 acres. He became the first millionaire selling beef to these mine towns. So hugely successful at it. And then you've got the nice. And then you've got the cattle barons. So in the 1870s, you get the beef bonanza. So you've got the long drives that are continuing, but the big growth is starting to be in ranching and the open range. Cattle industry is seen as an easy way to make money. Costs were low. You get free grass, free land. Remember, they're using public land, which becomes important with this clash between ranchers and homesteaders. And now the railroad, you can transport them east and west quite quickly. Profits were high, and there were lots of investors. Best way basically to make money was to have these large ranches, and only a few men would then dominate the industry. So this leads to the cattle barons, again, significant high during this period. Right, sorry, I skipped over that. So please pause it on the life of the long drive. It's hard, it's rough, the long drive. Cowboys are spending months going from south to the north. It's not a nice life. And when they get to these cow towns like Abilene, they're angry. They're kind of angsty. They want to spend the money. They want to drink alcohol, things like that. It leads to lawlessness as well. Remember, right? What's life on the ranch like though? So they're often huge areas of open land. Through the winter, the cattle roam quite freely. There's not much work for cowboys during the winter, but in the spring, during the roundup, the cowboys are needed to make sure the cattle are all collected. Cowboys fan out from central location on the ranch, driving the cattle ahead of them to like the central point. Once they're rounded up, they're branded to show which ranch they belong to. Then in the spring roundup, all the new calves would have to be branded with the same mark as their mother. Life was tough. Most cowboys were kind of in their early 20s. Cowboys lived in bunk houses, which was a lot more comfortable than sleeping rough on the long drive. There's not much entertainment, often quite strict rules, so good night band actually ranching. But this was work for the cowboys. This is how their life's changing, remember, with the open range. It's from the long drive to the open range. This is how their life's changing. Heavy snows was a problem in winter, stopped cattle accessing grass. Basically, cowboys had to ride out in this harsh winter, make paths, ensure they got fed. Big difference here is the long drive was not more seasonal work, whereas the life on the ranch, that would be more all year round. You got problems with the winter. Heavy snows was a major problem. Again, similar as I said before, cowboys having to ride out. And here's just an example of a cowboy and his equipment. Generally don't know why I added that in. I'm not sure how useful that's going to be, but there you go. Right, I'll be back next time with something just as invigorating.